We've said it once and we'll say it again. The Sony PlayStation represents a moment in gaming where it felt as though the future was within our grasp. While in retrospect the system had its limitations, bizarre 3D rendering, stunted video playback, a low resolution, and initially releasing with controllers that didn't work well with 3D environments, developers created many new experiences that pushed for greater immersion and storytelling, interesting mechanics that weren't possible before, and environments that oozed atmosphere. And with it being the 90s, you could even play your music CDs to pump out Limp Bizkit at the highest quality. The console was home to titles like the tactical espionage-centric Metal Gear Solid, the moody and gothic tones of Castlevania Symphony of the Night, professional wheelman simulator Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, film tie-in 007 Tomorrow Never Dies, indie productions like Devil Dice, and the only slightly derivative action-adventure game Alundra. But we'll start off today's episode with a classic that everyone knows, Crash Bandicoot. Back in the game's very earliest days as Project Willy the Wombat, Mark Cerny apparently was commissioning Hanna-Barbera Cartoon Studios to create and develop the character known only at that time as Willy. That was the name that Jason Rubin had chosen for his main character in his 6-page brief. Hanna-Barbera Studios were just around the corner from Universal Studios, making them an ideal partner. The artist who the studio assigned to the project was a young Butch Hartman, creator of The Fairly Odd Parents and Danny Phantom. But all Hartman knew about the character was that they span around and smashed into crates, and he'd read that wombats had beaver-like teeth, so his designs ended up being a hybrid between a beaver and Taz the Tasmanian Devil. If you've ever played or even just seen Crash Bandicoot, you'll know that this particular design was outright rejected. But now for a classic that few remember, probably the best Zelda clone ever made, Alundra. The studio that localized Alundra for the West, Working Designs, stated that during the localization process, they'd lowered the health of the game's enemies from the Japanese version, but increased their attack. This would ostensibly make things move along more quickly, and enemies would be more dangerous and exciting. However, this was a complete lie. Almost every single enemy in the game actually received an HP boost in the Western release, with nearly 30 enemies and bosses having an extra 50% or more health. Another interesting aspect of the game's localization appears with the character of Bonaire, who takes on a very typical surfer dude persona, though in the Japanese version of the game, this wasn't the case. The character's dialogue was altered and used as a representation of one of the game's main localizers, Zach Meston. One of the game's localization staff, Victor Ireland, stated on the Game FAQ's message board, "Bonaire just looked like a surfer dude to me, and his dialogue came out of conversations back and forth with Zach. He was basically a proxy for Zach, who wrote quite a bit in the game as well. As it went along, I encouraged him to turn up the volume on that character and make him a more exaggerated version of his secret self. The Japanese version of him was boring, and the name was different. This explains why the character may seem a bit odd compared to others, particularly the dialogue, 'Dude, it's okay if not everyone here believes in the gods. The faith of a few and a little weed is all we need, bro.' In all honesty though, if you are a fan of the Zelda franchise, you would be doing yourself a favor to check out Alundra if you haven't already done so. Alundra's translation was taken on by a fairly small team, but the team behind one other release has perhaps even more humble origins. Long before the PS1, home systems often had an emphasis on players being able to create their own games for the system. This tradition seemed to die off slowly over time, with most of the major contenders of the home console space being closed off. Sony wanted to change this approach with the PlayStation, and provided customers with the choice to purchase a homebrew development kit, which simply looked like a black PlayStation called the NetYorozy. Most games created by NetYorozy developers that saw any kind of release would see their way onto various PS1 demo discs, but one game managed to bag itself a full-blown commercial release. Devil Dice, a title developed by Shift, was lifted out of obscurity and given space as a full commercial game, thanks to Sony taking notice. The title, which is a rather unique puzzle game, managed to go on to become a massive success, selling well over 1 million copies worldwide, with over 850,000 being sold in Japan alone. The NetEurozy platform actually brought many would-be game developers out of the woodwork, including people like Kenkichi Shimuka, the creator of Ape Escape, or Mitsuru Kamiyama, who would go on to direct the Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicle series for Square Enix. Another strong aspect of the PlayStation was its advanced audio capabilities, which worked well for the James Bond franchise, a franchise well known for its musical numbers, with each film featuring a major artist to sing its opening theme. While the games don't always follow this same pattern, 007 Tomorrow Never Dies had a curiosity with a track that appears within the game's data. While never heard in-game, the track is referenced in the game's opening music credit sequence as Tomorrow Never Dies 2, though the track has been officially titled Letter to Paris, as seen on the game's official soundtrack. Code for the track does exist in the game's data, but it seems it must have been cut from the title at some stage, only appearing on the OST as a bonus hidden track. The song, composed by Tommy Tallarico and performed by Elaine Piver, is likely one of the most obscure and rare official musical numbers within the James Bond franchise. And it's actually pretty jamming. Another classic on the PS1 is Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, which has some unlikely inspiration. The idea to have players collect videotapes was directly inspired by the collection of stars in Super Mario 64. In designing the objectives, the team would gather at a table, draw a level, and then ask what could be done within said level, upon which the team members would provide ideas. Some rejected concepts from these sessions include levels taking place on a highway and a jetty, and a scenario in which the player would lose a wheel and have to skate on 3 wheels. That said, one level taking place on a highway-like strip was implemented during development, but was ultimately cut. This level was called Downhill, and was almost an exact copy of a level from Sega's arcade title Top Skater, which is probably why it was cut. The level would later be heavily reworked and implemented in the PS1 and Nintendo 64 versions of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 with the same name, this time set in Rio de Janeiro. One of our personal favorite games on the system is a continuation in a series that changed said series forever. Castlevania Symphony of the Night saw the return of Dracula's son, Alucard, and gave the player access to a more substantial set of abilities compared to earlier Castlevania releases. In a 1997 interview with the game's director, Koji Igarashi, and designer Toshiharu Furukawa, they were asked how they came up with ideas for the game's huge assortment of weapons and items. Igarashi stated that they used a variety of different references, books, and other materials, and tried to include things that had never been used in a Castlevania game before. Furukawa added that each of the staff members had a special attachment to a different kind of blade, so they ended up using a good variety of blades in the final game. However, this bias did result in the developer's favorite weapons being overpowered, adding that, not realizing that no one liked shields was a bit of a blind spot. During the planning stages of the game, they also came up with an alignment system. If the player used a lot of sub-weapons, they'd gain a holy alignment. If they used a lot of magic, they would gain a dark alignment. There would be different endings based on these alignments, with various subtitles, with Igarashi citing one of them being named Sima no Toriru, something like the trill of light and darkness. A trill is a musical ornament where 2 adjacent notes, holy and evil, alternate rapidly. The reason for this feature's removal is unknown. Speaking of titles that changed a series, according to Final Fantasy VII's art director Yusuke Nayora, he liked how his design of the city of Midgar turned out and had envisioned the city in his head as a pizza while he was designing it. This inspiration was actually referenced within the game itself. After the first Avalanche mission at the start of the game, Barrett will talk to Cloud about the upper plate of Midgar, saying, "The upper world, a city on a plate." It's because of that fucking pizza that people underneath are suffering. Nayora's inspiration is also referenced in the name of the song Underneath the Rotting Pizza, which prominently plays in many of the slum areas in Midgar. There's other interesting references in the game as well. The katakana for the enemy Gigi can also be read as Ziggy, the persona of David Bowie in Ziggy Stardust. The enemy model is based on this pun, looking like Ziggy Stardust and with a guitar for a tail. Both Gigi and the enemy it has fought alongside with, Christopher, use song attacks, and Christopher uses an attack called Stardust March, but only if Gigi is still alive. Next up, how about a little bit about the classic tactical espionage game Metal Gear Solid? According to a 1998 PlayStation Magazine interview with director, producer, writer, and general everything man Hideo Kojima, as well as designer and artist Yoji Shinkawa, Kojima originally had no intentions of adding the cyborg ninja character design for Gray Fox to the game, and that Shinkawa only drew the character because it's cool. At first, Shinkawa thought Gray Fox should have looked like a normal enemy soldier. He had several different ideas in mind and thought to try drawing a cyborg-ish and ninja-looking guy, of which the final design came out as a result. Despite Shinkawa wanting his design to become the main character in his own game, it didn't. Raiden, however, became a cyborg ninja in Metal Gear Solid 4 Guns of the Patriots, and later became the main character of his own game in Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance. So, in some small way, Shinkawa got to see his idea realized. Did you know that Sega actually heavily influenced the design of the PlayStation 1? Or that a British man had his name legally changed to PlayStation 2? For a whole bunch of PlayStation facts, check out the video on screen. This video actually features so many of my favorite PS1 games. Tony Hawk's, Metal Gear Solid, Alundra, Castlevania, Final Fantasy VII. I mean, they're all there. You should play them all. They're all brilliant.